share with you.
Okay, cool. Are we live?
No, two is on. Yeah, you're good. You're on the radio. Yep.
Okay, let's get this started then. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm your host, Kevin Mears.
I'm Brian McKinley.
I'm Misha Campbell.
And tonight we're going to be talking to Rich Newman. He's the author of the book Ghosts of the Civil War. Rich, how you doing tonight?
Great. How you guys doing?
We're good. So I've always been interested in kind of a history buff myself. Although I find it ironic, I grew up probably an hour, 2 hours from Gettysburg. I've never actually been there. So always one of those, I need to get out there one of these days.
Yeah.
I'll do it tomorrow.
It's always the people who live the closest to like the historic landmark that never bother to see it. I'm sure so many people in Arizona have never gone to the Grand Canyon because why? They figure they'll get there eventually.
So what got you interested in Ghosts of the Civil War in particular?
Well, actually, I went to film school at NYU, and when I first got out of film school, I got sent to Austin, Texas, to work as a production assistant on the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when that work was over, what's that?
I was just going, oh boy.
Oh, yeah. This is the 2003 one with Jessica Biel.
So,
when that was over, I was kind of fumbling around.
All your cousins are just, I can't remember how it goes. It was just that stupid.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I said, well, when that gig was over, I was just kind of looking for something to do. So I ended up deciding to do a documentary on haunted Civil War sites. And so we went around to 6 different historic homes that was associated with the Civil War in some way, and 5 different battlefields, and did interviews, gathered like some different ghosts of the evidence that different paranormal groups had gotten and things like that, and had a really cool little documentary called Ghosts of War, and we sold it to Sci-Fi where it screened, and I've just been kind of sitting on that subject for a while. And then when Llewellyn Books was like, well, it's time for a new book, what do you think you want to do? And I thought, well, maybe it's time to get back to the haunted Civil War.
Oh, nice.
Makes sense.
So what kind of stuff did you find when you were doing your documentary?
Well, I mean, one of the things we found was like people kind of experienced sort of the same stuff at the battlefields and things like that. People, the most commonly reported like activity would be like, people saying they hear the shouts of battle and cannon fire and musket, guns going off and basically the sounds of battle. And then the homes kind of vary a lot between being sort of the residual type of a haunting activity where, there's some sort of significant historical thing happening over and over again, to about a third of them maybe being an actual sort of intelligent ghost that seems to be interacting with people. But we got some great evidence and stuff, and you can actually, after the show actually screened on Sci-Fi, we didn't really want to know what to do with it next, so I ended up cutting up the segments into like little 7-minute segments and putting them on Vimeo, so you can actually watch, I think, 3 to 5 of them on Vimeo if you put in Ghosts of War.
Oh, very cool. So which battlefields did you wind up going to?
For the documentary, I live here in Memphis, so like we're right in the center of the country, so we kind of stayed kind of in the middle. We ended up going to Shiloh, Vicksburg, Stones River, a smaller place up here called Fort Pillow, and a place in Missouri that's it's escaping me at the moment. It's in Springfield. It was another pretty decent sized battle. And those were the major battlefields. And then the homes that we went to were Magnolia Manor here in Tennessee. We went to the Deason House in Ellisville, Mississippi, the Harney Mansion in Missouri, another place called the Minton House in Missouri, and a place in Illinois called the Eldred House, and then in Kentucky, the Octagon Hall.
So you did a bunch of them. Have you done more since when you were writing the book, or did you revisit any of those?
We went to the Eldred House quite a few times. We got some really good stuff from there. through weird happenstance, I've been sort of dabbling in different ways of photography for trying to get sort of capturing ghosts on, I would say film, but, the digital cameras.
Yeah.
But just trying to capture ghosts in photographs. Like we've been just sort of experimenting with different ways of doing it, rather than just going straight night vision or going straight, flash, style photography. And we ended up getting these Sony cameras that have this weird setting on there that's called twilight setting. And I think you use it, right when sunrise and sunset, when there's a little bit of light, but not quite enough. And for some reason, that light setting is really, really good for people trying to shoot ghost stuff. I mean, I'm always telling people, if you can find one of these Sony cameras that has this function on it, they're fantastic cameras. But we ended up shooting a series of photographs at the older house where you can actually see a small little smear of red light slowly turn into a full-blown apparition of an Indian floating 3 feet off the ground.
Oh, wow.
So Sony makes yet another product that's good for ghost hunting.
Sony, the brand for Ghostbusters everywhere.
Possibly the best EVP recorder I've ever seen is a Sony Panasonic digital IC recorder DDR8, I want to say. It's an old Sony one. And funny enough, it was discontinued by Sony because they had too many problems basically with people getting EVPs when they weren't trying to. So
I believe that. I actually used a couple of Sony IC recorders myself. Those are fantastic recorders for that.
See, Sony's missing out on a whole market here that they could be pushing toward. And I think that's if somebody, if some executive from Sony is listening and watching our broadcast, think about this.
Yeah, give me a shout out.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin could do endorsements. I mean, you could do all kinds of cool stuff with this Sony.
I'd always like to look for because I know there was the audio engineer who worked for Sony, Lou Randall. Lou gently being my mentor, but telling him off the record, yeah, this is why they discontinued the model. And basically, they figured out it was tuning into this one specific radio frequency, so they changed the radio frequency, and it doesn't do that anymore. But they just came out with new technology.
Well, then they did a similar thing, too, because the camera I'm actually talking about was one of a little small series of still cameras that they did that had the night vision on it. And they made like 4 or 5 models of it. But then people started complaining that people were using the night vision to do X-ray technology to look through clothing or something.
Yep.
I heard that
so
one.
they ended up canning all of the still cameras that used, the infrared shooting. And so that's why I say they're still kind of hard to find, but you can still find them on eBay on occasion. But those cameras, they had, the regular, I think they were around 5 megapixels, but you could shoot regular photos, and then it had a little switch, and if you went left, it was, the infrared night shot, and if you went right, it was that twilight setting, which I think is just the way they're just boosting the low light by letting a little bit of IR and UV in.
That makes sense.
And that seems to that setting just really does really well.
Yeah. And
That's
maybe it
interesting.
filters certain types of light that makes it easier to see certain things.
I mean, I've worked with a lot of cameras over the years. I know one of the best I should say one of the best spirit photographs, because it wasn't a ghost, was actually done with an infrared video camera in a vaudeville theater in Connecticut. I wish I still had that picture. It was interesting. It was a camera set up on a time release to do a series of photos, and you have this amorphous blob of light that just resolves more and more into this very distinct, very reptilian-looking face.
Wow.
Looking, huh?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, basically, it was a succubus.
Ah.
Oh, man.
But it was down to the creature only had these 2 fang teeth in the middle. You could tell. The head had ridges, and you could go, okay, there's 5 ridges. One of the clearest pictures I've ever seen.
Oh boy.
Well, people forget, if you're an old school ghost hunter, back in the day, we'd be carrying around the infrared night shot, the digital 8s. And the old Sony digital 8 cameras, when they went from Super 8 or whatever to digital 8, they were recording a real basic digital image still on an 8mm cassette. And all of those cameras had fantastic night shot on them. And most of them you could put in the old school Sony memory sticks, and you could take, some stills like directly to the stick while you were shooting your video. And so really that was like the only tool we really had to do that with night shot back then.
Hey, I still remember for many years when I first got started in the business, I was running around with an old Polaroid camera. And as low tech as it is, and granted, we're talking about early 90s to probably the late 2000s is when I was working with it. Early 2000s, and I got some good results. And
Back in the day, in the 90s, for sure, they used to always tout the Polaroids because, they were instant pictures, so you weren't manipulating them in some way, like in the dark room or something like that. So a lot of people, kept the Polaroids around just for that reason alone. I even remember, like, if you watch the show Sightings, was one of the big reasons why I love this ghost stuff is because I watched that show Sightings in the 90s.
Yeah, I watched it too.
Yeah, and there was an episode on there where they were talking to the guys who did the famous Entity case, and they were showing all the Polaroids they had taken, of Doreen or Doris, the lady who was afflicted in the Entity case. And so I think it was actually that episode that made me start putting a Polaroid in the back.
No, actually, a long time ago, because when I used to do the Lou Gentili show, we had one of the gentlemen from the Entity case on the show, which is certainly an interesting case. And I remember listening to them, and it's like, you realize, like, even it's textbook suck it, Incubus.
Right.
Although, granted, from what they told me at the time, the sexual attack part of the case happened before the investigators got involved. It had stopped by the time they were there.
Yeah, and that case gets really weird when you start getting away from what Barry Taff and those guys were investigating. Like, if you even just reading the novel of the Entity, you start getting into this weird territory where Doris starts saying, like, some of the entities were actually appearing to her as almost like little dwarf-like things, and like one of them looked Asian, and it was actually these little dwarf creatures that was holding her down as they were sexually assaulting her, and there's some really bizarre stuff in that case.
Oddly enough, I've had cases. This sounds familiar to work I've done. The very small spirits come. One of the worst cases I ever did were a gang of creatures. The ones that I saw were maybe no more than a foot tall.
Yeah.
But holding people down, and then the giant weight settling on in the very late part of the night.
You almost sounded like scary Irish myths or something to getting to a foot tall.
Yeah, the fairies.
Oh, fairies. Fairies.
We've talked about fairies on this show before.
I have a little saying
Can we
about it.
Can we just call them? Can we at least call them dark fairies so they sound kind of scary?
Fairies are already scary.
That's the thing, and we really need to do a longer piece on this at some point. But when everybody thinks of fairies, they think of the little Tinkerbells, which are your Victorian
age.
19th century idea. But if you go back to the original folklore, the Sidhe, which are the inspiration for the elves, basically, and everybody thinks of these beautiful and light and sunny, they're child stealers.
Yeah. Well, and the Leanne and she would lure travelers into their houses and then like rip them apart and eat them and drink their blood. Fun stuff.
There's a thing I have with dealing with fae.
Don't.
If you still want to, don't. If you really want to, don't. If you're super persistent, proceed with extreme caution.
See, it's one of the things. What got me interested in the paranormal was very much the historical sites. I grew up in a town called New Hope, Pennsylvania, which, well, it has a Civil War canon of all things, but it's mostly tied to the Revolution.
Yeah, it's a lot of Washington's Crossing stuff. Because it's close to.
It's
site.
just up the river from where the crossing happened, actually, and he camped out in the town at the time. But so I started out with this interest in the historical stuff and the ghosts, and from like the mid '90s on, I've been dealing with all this unpleasant and human stuff, and I miss the historical stuff.
I definitely say my attachment to ghost stories comes from history too. Because I mean, the really good ghost stories, whether it's the Civil War or anything,
Mhm.
a really good ghost story is always tied up in really good history too.
Yeah.
So I mean, like when you go to this badass Victorian house, they're going to tell you all their ghost stories, but they probably got some just natural history there too. When they start talking about the family and the wars
Mhm.
they were involved with, and the things that happened there, I mean, that's always been half the draw to me, is that history, and that's honestly the best thing about the subject of the Civil War, because there is so much of that history there.
Indeed.
So are you planning on continuing with this, like doing more investigations or more movies or books?
Yeah, well, this is the fifth book on the subject of ghosts that I've done for Llewellyn.
What are the other? I mean,
you
Llewellyn
should
let
plug
me know
some of
about
the
the one
others.
book. You should talk. Yeah, let us know what else you've written. We're happy to plug everything.
Well, the first book I actually pitched them on was almost like a travel guide, just for people who are interested in ghosts, that they could travel and have all these different places. Like, say, if you were going to Philly, you could look up a haunted restaurant to eat at, a haunted hotel to stay in,
Oh, nice.
because people were actually saying, haunted tourism was booming.
Yep.
And so the first book I wrote was called The Ghost Hunter's Field Guide, and it's just a
I've seen that
giant thick
book.
book of haunted places.
Okay, yeah, I do know
Then
that
I did
book.
one for Llewellyn that was Ghost Hunting for Beginners. And then I did one that was actually about a case in Mississippi. I wrote as a cautionary tale for would-be ghost hunters called Devil in the Delta.
Hmm.
And then I wrote one called Haunted Bridges that came out last year. And then now I'm on Ghosts of the Civil War.
Nice.
Now, it's funny. It's like not that I think about it. I think I've seen Ghost Hunting for Beginners, and I think I've at least paged through the Ghost Hunter the guide book as well.
Yeah, that was pretty. That's been out about 5-6 years. Yeah.
Cool.
There are so many sites, just like you said, the industry is starting to boom. I've talked to hotels that are doing the guidebook. You probably mentioned it. You probably have at least heard of the Logan Inn,
Sure.
which is of course very famous in Pennsylvania. And the old owners were always very open about the paranormal thing because they made money on it. And then it changed hands, and they weren't so into it. I remember trying to help persuade them to realize, no, wait, you don't need to run away from this. People are into this right now.
Yeah. Well, there's that the guest that we had a couple weeks ago.
Carol Matsumoto,
Yes.
who has an inn in Connecticut.
Yes, you would, Rich. You would probably be interested in that place. It's apparently a ghost convention. Yeah.
GhostCon.
Yeah, GhostCon 2017.
Never ending GhostCon. Never ending GhostCon.
Like I said, it's cool. We were talking to her, and literally, I'm just picturing ghosts like just conga lining around in ballrooms and stuff. That's what it sounded. It sounded like they're there, they're having a great time, they're all like mingling and stuff. I'm like, this is really. I never thought ghosts did that.
Right. Well, when I was actually doing that first book, it has over 1,100 locations in it. So I mean, I spent about 8 months just contacting all these places, writing, getting all their stories documented, looking for sort of different paranormal groups that could either, sort of verify what they were saying were true, and it wasn't just sort of a PR gimmick kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And
I've run into
and one of
those
the things
too.
I kind of figured out was, I mean, you have about a third of these places sort of embrace their haunted history.
Mhm.
I mean, some of them go so far as to put it on their websites.
Oh
And,
yeah.
we're cool about talking about it, and even
Yeah.
do ghost hunting classes and stuff like that. And then you've got about a third of them that are they neither promote it or dissuade it. They're just kind of
It's
yeah,
there.
that's a story about the place. There it is. We're not going to comment on it. And then you got the third that totally wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah. They don't want to be
And I
known
remember
as the
there's a
haunted
really
hotel.
famous place in Virginia. I won't call them out by name, but it's in Richmond, Virginia. It's a bed and breakfast. It's a very well-known haunted place. I mean, a quick Google probably right now, Richmond, Virginia, B&B ghost, and it would probably pop right up. And so many people have written about this place, and the ghost stories and everything, and their experiences. And when I contacted them about the book and wanting to get, because I wanted all the information straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
all the lady would tell me was, "Sir, the only thing I'm going to say is the only spirit in this house is the Lord," and she hung up on me.
The very
Oh,
religious
boy.
sorts.
Yeah, so they just don't
Oh,
want anything
boy,
to do with it.
Those that have no actual concept of the afterlife.
Right. So, I mean, like, so that was generally, like the three different sort of receptions that I would get when I would approach these hotels and restaurants and museums and you name it about their ghost stories.
Yeah. Well, because I can imagine for some people, like for me personally, I'm terrified of ghosts. And this is something Kevin, kind of ribs me about all the time, is why I'm hanging out with a paranormal investigator when I'm definitely scared of
I keep trying to
ghosts,
explain to him this stuff follows me home.
Yeah. But like I said, so far, I haven't had any direct experiences. I've heard from other people. But if you told me, oh, we're going to a hotel, and by the way, it's haunted, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to that hotel, because I don't want to have
So
a
apparently,
close personal encounter with a ghost. It's just not something I'm looking for in my life.
so apparently, according to Kevin, most hotels are haunted.
Yeah, I get that, and there's always stories, but I can see. What I was explaining was I can see why that certain group would think that there are just as many people who are going to be turned off by the idea of.
Yeah.
And they don't want that to be associated
Especially
with their place.
the bed and breakfasts and the little independent type places are one thing, but I've worked for a bunch of chain hotels, and I'll tell you, disturbingly enough, there's the one hotel I worked for that the one room was haunted, and disturbingly enough, I was there for why it was haunted as well as for the haunting.
Oh.
Because we had a guy overdose in one of our rooms. And the thing was, whenever we put somebody in that room afterwards, and probably to this day, I could ask our one friend who still is a manager there now, and we'd get complaints about this weird smell in the room. But whenever everybody went check the room, they couldn't find the source, and it was always gone by morning. And it was only that one room.
Nice. See, you should offer to come back and do like a room blessing or something. clear out the ghost problem.
Interestingly, there is a hotel chain though that on the other side of the country from you guys in the Pacific Northwest. They're called McMenamin, and their gig is buying these old properties that have a lot of folklore and ghost stories associated with them, and then transforming them into these upscale boutique hotels. And they very much embrace the ghost stories and the folklore, and they put it on the website. They encourage people to come for that stuff, and they're making a killing.
I'm not surprised. The Pacific Northwest, that's a good source of tourism for them.
Well, yeah, you've got the right kind of crowd there.
You got the right kind of crowd, and you also have the Oregon
Vortex.
Vortex, which is the single largest amount of Bigfoot sightings in the U.S.
I was just thinking as well, one of the most iconic haunted hotels in the United States, the Stanley Hotel. They totally embrace the fact they're haunted.
Oh yeah, well they got famous, thanks to Stephen King. So why wouldn't they grab onto that?
Absolutely.
I still find it fascinating that apparently Stephen King hates the cinematic adaptation of The Shining.
Well, because it was a terrible adaptation.
It's a good movie. It's a bad adaptation.
It's a good movie, but it's a bad adaptation.
You can enjoy it as a movie on its own, but as an adaptation of the book, it fails in almost every respect because it takes the idea of the book and turns it inside out.
Okay, so we're coming up on the hour, on the first or the end of the first half hour, I should say.
Yes.
So it's probably a good time to give out the call-in number if anybody's interested. What is the number? I always forget.
You need to have it written down.
It's 807 or 609-807-2492. We've got a lot of people watching too on the page.
So 609-807-2492.
807-2492.
Country code 1 if you need the country code.
Yes.
Thank you. So
please call us.
Of the experiences you've had doing these various haunted battlefields and haunted homes, what was the most interesting for you?
Well, I mean, we've had quite a few experiences, actually. We went we ended up calling about 20 different places, just going back to the documentary, as possible candidates to go to. But we kind of, we knew like we really needed to have places that had a lot of people reporting activities and experiences and things like that to have any kind of a decent odds of actually getting something while we were there.
Right.
So we ended up going to some pretty popular haunted places. Like we went to Octagon Hall in Kentucky, which is really a big ghost hunting place around here in mid-America. And had a lot of really great stuff there. We, heard voices in real time, disembodied voices in real time. We had some fantastic EVPs captured that sort of corroborated some of the stories there that a young girl had been burned to death in the basement due to an accident, being too close to the fire, kind of a thing. And also they claimed to have had some Confederate soldiers who hid out in the attic when Union troops came through and ended up getting killed up there, and got some interesting EVPs up there. But I would say on the scale of personal experiences, I mean, being touched, we saw about two-thirds of an apparition while we were shooting at Magnolia Manor here in Tennessee. We actually had it almost looked like the upper torso of a person was appearing with sort of a bald head. And you could even see sort of black where the eyes and an open mouth would be. And that's about as much as it came in before it sort of winked out, and that's the closest I've came to seeing a full-bodied apparition, per se. I guess a third body apparition.
It's still more than most people see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was enough, really. It was startling. And we had a camera crew, so I mean, we were in the next room. It was actually in the room over from where we were shooting. We were setting up, and it was in a place that no one had given us any sort of hot spot about or told us any experiences about. It was between a dresser and a wall, just random. And everybody just started freaking out and pointing over there, and I turned around, and that's what I got to see a piece of it, We had a few different experiences like that. It's one of those things where you do it long enough, I think you will have an experience, but you play the odds every time.
This is true. I've been to plenty of houses where I've seen things. Usually you get the figures out of the corner of your eye, weird noises, weird smells. I've never seen the ghostly apparition. I have seen a shadow. Well, people would call it a shadow person. I like to call a spade and call it a demon in this case. I've seen imps. The one imp was one of the most detailed things I've ever seen, where I could actually make out features. But for the most part, yeah, you don't see apparitions very often. I've heard it described as like the holy grail in the paranormal field, just because it's so rare.
Yeah, and I mean, and then people say, why don't we have these great photographs or videos of ghosts? And it's like, well, putting that one camera in the right place at the right time, shooting at that moment, and it just happens so quick. I mean, even sometimes having the camera in your hand, when it appears, the time it takes you to hit the power button on it,
it's already gone.
Say if you had your phone, for instance, by the time you click the little home button, put your code in, get the camera app out, point it, it's gone. And so, I totally feel for all those people now, that tell those stories like that.
No, I'm just remembering my TV production teacher was telling us a story about how he was a cameraman on some MTV thing or something or other. All of a sudden, this huge fiery car crash comes speeding on down, and it was really something that was horrific, but something you kind of want to see. And he's standing there holding the camera that's off, going, "Wow, I wonder if anybody got that."
Right. Well, one of the things we actually picked up pretty early in the shooting of the documentary was we would go into the places, and we would usually talk to the owners of the house or the museum or whatever the particular place was, and then eventually, when we figured out all the hot spots where we wanted to put the cameras and the mics and all that stuff, we would finally get rolling on footage. But so many interesting things would happen while we were just, talking to the people initially and coming into the place that we finally learned about the second or third location that we should just automatically take one of those Sony IC recorders, turn it on, and just have it rolling even when we walk in the house. Because so much of it would happen just while we were being introduced to the place.
What I find interesting there is so many of my experiences, it's like things I've seen almost never show up on video and vice or audio. What I hear doesn't show up on audio and vice versa.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I chalk this up to energy. I mean, one of the things about ghosts, is, I've found, excuse me, that the more interactive that you are with them, the sort of mutual energy sort of builds. So, like when you start getting a few knocks on the wall, or maybe, if just someone's listening to EVPs real time and they're getting something, and you start to get that little bit, you start, interacting with the ghost, hey, show us something, let's do something, let's talk about this. And it seems the more you can kind of work that, the more it sort of ramps up.
Sure, the more
so
recognition
we're always
you
kind of
give it.
looking for that interactivity,
Yeah, I would agree completely. I mean, recognition, it's a huge thing in my end of the field, too. With the more attention you give it, the more you usually get out of it.
The ghosts want their 15 minutes just like everybody else.
You bet.
And it always amuses me. And just some of the experiences I've had bringing somewhat skeptical people along for the ride. I did EVP with Brian at an event a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
Sadly, the closest we came to getting a really good EVP, we realized when we were reviewing it, that was actually me. Because a friend of mine who was with us had the entity that was there touch her on the back. And she says, something just touched my back. And I go, hello. And we all spent about 5 minutes going, wait, something just said hello. And then going, oh, right, that was me.
Yeah, we forgot it was Kevin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
I've done that
remain
before,
unconvinced.
somebody says something in a weird voice just because they're joking around, but you forget about that, and then you're bored listening to the 5th hour of audio on the 2nd audio recording, and you're sitting there at the computer and all of a sudden you hear this, hello, man, something you're like, what the heck was that?
We got it!
Kevin, are you taking other calls with this gentleman, or you want
Yeah,
to
we
wait?
can take other calls.
We'll take other calls? Okay, here you go. I'm going to add it and see what happens.
We have a caller.
You have a caller, so caller.
Caller, are you there?
Hey, what's up, Jim?
Hi.
Well, it's Kevin Mears is on.
Yeah, hi.
I think, yeah.
This
Okay.
is Kevin Mears.
Who-
I was calling in to say I was loving the show. I was watching.
Who is
Hi,
this?
Sam. It's Rocky from last night. The Talk Fire.
Okay.
Oh, great. Very cool. You have a question
What's
for
up,
Rich?
brother? No, I was just calling. I was loving a Hispanic joke. That was great.
That was the other show you're talking about.
I'm calling about the guys on tonight right now.
Oh, okay.
The ghost guy?
Yeah, the funny guys.
No, that was the last show.
Last show. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh, I was looking at it. Oh, I'm sorry, brother.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's all good. No problem. But thanks for the call.
All right, yeah.
All right.
I was just watching it on my Facebook. I'm like,
That's what it is. It's delayed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the delayed reaction.
Thank you for the call, though.
All right, yeah, I'll see you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Figures one of our first real callers.
Our
for
first,
the other
actually,
show.
really our first actual caller. It was for the other show.
Yeah.
The only other one we had was when you put your daughter on.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we have.
And I just knocked Brian's book
And
off.
there it goes. Drawing dead to the swan dive. Thank you, Alicia.
I fitted Phelan with cement overshoes. There we go.
Yeah, he's sleeping with the fishes.
It doesn't want to stay. There
There
is
we go.
spirits in here.
Ever since we started the show,
You
we've
might
been
have to
having
prop it open a little
weird
bit,
things happen. And currently, the one book is apparently afraid of heights.
Either that, or it's just so sickened by the quality of our show. It's just like I don't want to be associated with this anymore. Phelan's like I don't want to be associated with this show anymore. I'm out of here.
That sounds funny.
Well, he's a vampire.
So-
He can
so
speak
Kevin-
English.
Kevin says he's never been to Gettysburg. Does that mean all three of you? None of you been there?
No, I've never actually been either. It was one of those places. Since I was a kid, I was always interested in the Civil War, but I've never actually gone to Gettysburg.
Road trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, neither have I. But I think for me, it would have been a good 3-4 hour drive.
Yeah, I lived a little closer, but not much.
I have family along the way, and we could find somewhere to crash to go, and I'll go out there.
Yeah, it'd be fun, even just for the historical.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
do it sometime when they're doing the historical reenactments, and we could go out.
they don't do the reenactments on the site.
Oh, okay.
legal stuff.
You can do a whole ghost vacation though at Gettysburg. I mean,
Oh,
you
yeah.
could stay in a different haunted B&B every single night. Like eat at a haunted tavern,
Mhm.
go out and explore the haunted areas of the actual battlefield.
Oh, they
I
can
mean,
do that.
you could basically spend your entire weekend around ghosts.
Yes,
no,
as I was saying, Kevin and Amisha are perfectly welcome to do that.
that would be. That actually might be an interesting honeymoon for us.
There you
Grab
go.
an RV and just do a ghost vacation.
There you go.
Well, given our planned honeymoon at the moment is New Orleans. New Orleans is not short on haunted locations.
True.
No, New Orleans has its share of ghosts.
It's like we're not going to be wanting for ghosts to go looking for.
But you could, on the trip there and back, you could maybe schedule some other use Rich's book and find some other places along the way.
There's a bunch of places I keep meaning to visit. Granted, some of them are much further afield. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm jealous. The one friend of mine who does a YouTube channel lives very close to the Winchester Mystery House, and I've always wanted to go there.
Oh boy.
But it's like that's clear across the other side of the country.
Well, I'm hoping to visit there soon. I've actually been working with a Japanese, I guess, a network called Fuji TV, and they've been shooting a show here in America that's all about like weird places.
Oh, cool.
And I'm like their token ghost guy.
Yeah.
So every time they go to a ghost place, they end up bringing me, and I tell them, the history of the place, and tell them the ghost stories and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and then we end up sort of monitoring, because it's usually a haunted hotel we go to, so we end up
Naturally.
usually monitoring some poor Japanese sap who gets stuck in the haunted room, and we get to watch him squirm all night. So that's been a blast. I've done 6 episodes with him.
That's a good gig.
So you guys are going to do Winchester?
Yeah, they're talking about doing the Winchester House. We did we did the Queen Mary. We
Mm-hmm.
did the Stanley Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
We did the Lizzie Borden House.
Nice.
We did the Shanley Hotel in New York. We did the Dauphine Orleans in New Orleans. And what was the 6th? Oh, and we did the Grand Geyser Hotel in Bakers City, Oregon.
I'll tell you, if you guys are looking for a place and it's got Civil War connections, although I don't know who it's currently owned by, there's a house in Philadelphia called, what's the name of the house? Balroy Mansion. It was,
Oh, yeah.
I've heard of
You've
that.
heard of it?
Yes.
Yes. My mentor and I, Lou, were like the first investigators to go into that place in like 20 years, and then unfortunately, last I had heard, which was pre-2009, because Lou passed in 2009, and he's the one who told me, the guy who owned it, who was like the last living descendant of General Meade, had passed away. So I don't know what the
Wow.
deal is, but it's an interesting place. And just
Yeah, it's a neat place. Well, the Japanese folks aren't so much interested in the Civil War aspect. They just places that are, I guess, so famous in the U.S. that they've even heard of them in Japan, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
like the Stanley Hotel, like
Mhm.
for most people, is associated
it's
with The Shining.
very famous.
And so, oh yeah, it's been fun working with the Japanese people because, like you're talking about the Sony connection and would Sony pursue a ghost line of equipment. I'd have to say I doubt it because my experience has been the Japanese are very superstitious about
Oh yeah.
the ghost stuff. I
that's
mean,
because their
very
ghosts
much
don't
so.
tend to be nice.
Yeah, their ghosts are scary. They have a very
oh,
different.
they are. They're terrifying, and they have different names. We're like, yeah, there's a ghost. They're like, no, it's this one specific kind of ghost, which is
Oh.
like one of 1,000 different kinds of ghosts.
Oh yeah, they classify.
And yeah,
them.
they all have horrific stories.
What's interesting is, and I actually was at a convention a while back and found out the why of this. It is, yeah, they have all these different types of ghosts, and they all look exactly the same. And there's a reason. There's reason. Well, no, even in the stories, they're all female, white kimonos with long, stringy black hair, and there's reasons for that. I mean, the white kimono is pretty straightforward because white in Asian cultures is the color of death as opposed to black.
Yes.
But the long, stringy hair, the black, the coloration, the female. There was this Buddhist artist who woke up one night and saw a ghost. But because being an artist, he decided to paint the experience. Being a Buddhist, he was famous for the fact that he didn't paint anything out of his imagination. He always painted exactly what he saw in a very literal sense. So he painted this ghost exactly the way he saw her. So to the Japanese, all ghosts must clearly look like this.
Huh. I could definitely say they take them very seriously. Like,
Yeah,
none of the, whereas you guys are kind of, only one of the three of you maybe would not stay in a haunted hotel. Most of the people I hang around with generally, aren't frightened of ghosts. We're sitting in a dark room and talking out loud to a prospective spirit. But boy, none of the Japanese are. None of the people I'm with are happy at all to be going to a haunted place. And once I start telling them the stories about the place, you just see the looks on their face, just the blood drains out of their face.
Yeah.
I bet. You get that with film crews. I had filming with the Banyan Productions for the Learning Channel in 2001. Bunch of British guys had been sent out to film with us, and these guys had died with sharks, gotten to see shamans in the Amazon rainforest, done all these crazy things, and then we suggested we set one of them in a room by himself with the camera for an hour and see what happens. None of them would go anywhere near that idea.
I don't blame him.
But no, just thinking of the Japanese tourist thing, I gotta imagine there's certain things that are cultural, and then there's certain things even we have heard about this, so even we are terrified of it. Like us hearing on this side of the coast, it's about the suicide forest.
Right.
In Japan, yeah.
Yeah,
They've actually been talking about bringing me to Japan to do an episode there, so I'm kind of looking forward to that.
I'm jealous.
I'll say this. One thing that definitely is apparent is when we talk about ghosts a lot of times, and even when we tell, ghost stories about a place, say if we lived in a home and we were saying it was haunted, and you'll hear this a lot from innkeepers and hotel people too. They'll say, yeah, we're haunted, but they're not scary ghosts. They're just the spirit of someone who died, and they want attention, and they're just trapped here.
Yeah.
A lot of the Japanese stories are nothing like that, because almost universally in their ghost stories, they're trapped there because they're angry, or they want revenge, or they're vengeful, and they have a purpose of the people they want to create harm to. So all of their ghosts are sort of nasty.
Yeah,
and we're all like, no, that's the ghost of Grandma. She's cool. She's not going to mess with you. And they're like, no, Grandma wants to kill you.
The thing you run into as well with Japan is that the traditional underworld in Japan, Yomi, from I want to say Shinto, it's not a pleasant it's not like hell in Christianity. It's where everyone goes, but it's not a pleasant place. Yeah. You go there and you rot. And you just live the way you do here, except it's dark and you're rotting. And the goddess of the underworld is rotting. And so she's got kind of this, my afterlife sucks. Why do you get to have a good one mentality to the whole thing? So it's there's a reason why the ghosts of Japan aren't real happy. The thing I always found very interesting about them is in a lot of the Japanese legends, unlike American ghosts, you walk through them. Japanese ghosts, they're actually usually supposed to be solid.
Yeah, that'd be just one more reason to be afraid of them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, they materialize and hurt you.
Yeah, which I think is why you get all these urban legends about these Japanese ghosts that are utterly horrible, like the slit-mouth woman or the teke-teke spirit.
The creepypasta. And
yes.
I would say the other one for famous American sites I could suggest for the show would be Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh boy.
Which is very well known. And yeah, I've been through there in the dead of night. It's lots of activity.
I'd like to actually, that's a place I would like to go to. And bridging back over again to the Civil War stories, a lot of the questions that I'll get on shows and stuff is, what do you think are the scariest, haunted Civil War places? And it's usually the prisons and the hospitals, because so much misery
and death and suffering,
so much pain, suffering, misery, that you just can't walk in some of these places without feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I heard about this one place that used to be a Civil War hospital. There was this mysterious floor that when they went down there, they actually watched somebody getting their leg amputated, and the doctors are kind of just shooing them away. hey, like we're busy here, go away.
Well, that was the thing
Right.
of a story I heard. I had a friend who was a Civil War reenactor telling me the story of when they were doing the TV movie about Andersonville, and
Oh god.
the
yeah. That place was terrible.
actors in uniform sitting on the porch of the one building that was actually part of the camp. They weren't filming; they were just, it was a break between shots type of thing. And there were more people in the photograph than there were people in the actual site when they took the picture.
Right. And I mean, and even some of the places you go to, like Fort Mifflin, Fort
Mhm.
Delaware, Fort Pulaski, that were basically used to house criminals
Oh yes.
and, Civil War criminals and things like that, have the most horrific stories. These poor, like, just so depressed and gone souls that are trapped there, that they do have that, typical scary ghost vibe to them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been through Eastern State. I've been through Byberry State Mental Hospital, which was an infamous hospital in Philadelphia before it was torn down. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about that feeling of darkness and just terror.
There's an
Despair.
asylum in New Jersey that is supposed to be pretty infamous for like being haunted.
And there's one supposedly near where we currently live
Yeah,
that supposedly is gone, but it's not really gone.
yeah, that's I think the one that I heard about.
Well, no, there's the one. Funny enough, I know there's the one mental hospital in Pennsylvania, not far from where I grew up, that it was a gate. It was famously known as a gate to hell, and as I understand it, it's not anymore. And I know the person who fixed it.
Mhm.
That's a whole other show.
But I've always wanted to do. I mean, I know the tricky part is, of course, that most battlefields won't let you do it. But I've always wanted to go to one of these battlefields at night, just because I've heard this. I had the one friend who did a church camp in San Antonio, Texas, and her telling me about how the church leaders would make them cross the street and go around the Alamo so they wouldn't hear the gunshots at night. And I always thought it would be interesting to go to one of these sites to hear the the cannon fires, the shouts, still going on after all this time.
Well, I will say, I mean, you do hear those during the day, too.
Mhm.
But some of what is little known, though, is that a lot of these bigger battlefields, like Shiloh, for instance,
Mhm.
they do actually have campsites.
Oh,
I mean, it's not all of them, but there's quite a few of them that do actually have campsites. So the ones that do have campsites, you can always, pitch a tent in the campsite and be there at night. Now, you might get in trouble for, say, wandering to the other side of the battlefield, hanging out, like over by, was it Devil's Den or something like that, on Gettysburg. But as far as being in the park, that's entirely possible with the ones that have campsites.
I hadn't heard of that before. I need to look into this.
Yeah.
I'm looking up tents now.
Well, we need to look up a battlefield that'll allow it first.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, this will do it. Let's do this.
Just bring a motor home. Rent an RV.
Well, if you guys all do a road trip to Gettysburg and do your ghost thing there, you'll definitely have to bring me back so I can hear about what happened there.
We'll be happy to do it. I mean, we need to do that. We'll drag Brian along because he'll at least do the daytime stuff to see the battlefield.
Yeah, I'll check out the history. No problem. I love that stuff. Yeah, I have no interest in talking to a Civil War angry ghost or whatever. No.
I'm not sure how many of them are angry.
I'd be pretty damn angry.
I'd imagine a good chunk of them are in pain, though.
Exactly. And if you're in pain for like 200 years, you're going to be pretty pissed off.
True.
I'd point out, though, if you're going to run into a pissed off spirit, don't you want to be with the guy who knows what to do about it?
Oh, yeah. Well, if I had to, yes. But I'm saying I think...
It's like if something happens and we've got it covered, you don't need to panic.
If something did happen, I would prefer to have you there. But why put myself in the position in the first place?
Keep in mind, yes, I did Eastern State Penitentiary. I brought a fully ordained experienced exorcist with me when I did it. Granted, we also use the... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you'll definitely be passing up on what's basically a ghost hunter's pilgrimage, which is the Sachs-covered bridge. I mean, I think that's probably one of the most heavily trafficked haunted spots in America for ghost hunters.
It's been so long. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, have you heard of that?
I was going to say, oddly enough, I haven't. It's been so long since I've done any research on Gettysburg itself, so it's just sort of drawing a blank.
It's a bridge. It is a covered bridge. It's just on the outskirts of the battlefield. You can actually go there at night, which is another reason why it's really popular there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's known because 3 Confederate soldiers were hanged there for deserting.
Ooh.
And now people see everything from seeing full-blown apparitions of 3 people hanging from the rafters
mm-hmm.
to just the sounds of them screaming as they were, being executed, to actual ghost lights, not the dreaded orbs, but actual
mm-hmm.
visible balls of light floating along the bridge. All kinds of different activity there. So it's a really popular place.
See,
for
he
people to go
wonders
ghost
why
hunting.
He wonders why I wouldn't be interested in it. Oh yeah, that sounds delightful. To
To him, it sounds terrifying. To me, it sounds like a day ending in Y. It's like, let's do this. Where do we go? Where do we go? Of course, part of me being the inherent sadist that I am is also thinking, okay, so we take Brian out to see the battlefield during the day, and then at night we're going to dinner. And we just
On the
accidentally
covered bridge,
happen
yeah,
to
sure.
wind up on that covered bridge.
Yeah, no.
If you're not driving, you're not going to know until we're there.
See, the other big problem is I'm a big ball of like negative energy apparently. So I think that's one of the things that happens is when I'm there, nothing shows up.
Which is just challenge accepted. Trust
Exactly.
me. We'll find.
Right.
I'll sit there singing "Bridge Over Troubled Water" all the time.
So you want to make sure that the violent stuff shows up and it targets you for your singing.
No, the ghosts will just be like, nah, we're not, we ain't doing this.
We get the EVPs and it's shut up.
Yeah. For the love of God,
Well, I mean,
stop singing.
If you're there a couple nights, where you could stay one of the night, you have the Tony Pierce House Inn, which is well known for its ghost stories. You've got the Gettysburg Hotel. You've got Cashtown Inn just outside town.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Jenny Wade House to visit. And like I said, you can even go so far, a good way to trick the wimp amongst you into having some fun is to take them to the tavern. There's actually you can get a few beers in them, and then he won't care if a ghost shows up.
Unfortunately, I don't drink either, so that doesn't work.
No.
Oh.
Again, we're going to dinner. We happen to drive across the covered bridge. What a coincidence. And we're here anyway. Or if all else fails, the ancient horror standby. Oh no, we were accidentally driving over that bridge and the car broke down.
That's what I get out of
Right,
Star
which is
Wars.
a pretty common
Yeah.
haunted bridge tale, right?
Exactly. And of course, the obligatory gets pushed off of the bridge with the handprints. I grew up.
Oh yeah, I
I
Haunted
grew up one
Bridges
of
was my
those.
last book last year, so I ended up doing quite a few interviews about that.
Oh my God, yeah.
So I'm betting you found a couple of. I had, and I've heard of other ones by the exact same name all over the country, but I grew up near Van Sant Covered Bridge in PA, which is also known as Crybaby Bridge. And
Yeah, I have an entire chapter in the book on crybaby bridges.
yeah,
There's literally one in every state.
I'm betting there's several states with more than one.
Yeah.
Oh yes,
And
the
I,
crybaby bridge legend is probably the most well known, and then the second would be the one you just almost started describing a second ago, which is the whole pull your car up, put it in neutral, turn it off, and then invisible hands are going to push you across the
yeah,
bridge, kind of a thing.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that urban legend on like so many. Things.
see, our Crybaby Bridge was both. And I remember talking.
So the babies cried and also pushed your car.
Yep.
And push you off the bridge.
Complete with the. I even had a friend of mine describe to me once putting talcum powder on the bumper, and all of a sudden the fingerprints appear. I'm like, did you wipe your bumper clearly first, given you leave fingerprints on the bumper? And baby powder does actually. It's one of those things with these urban legends. Like, baby powder is at least a passable fingerprint powder. You're just
Right.
probably picking up your own fingerprints. And I was out at the
Yeah, I
bridge a
would
bunch
say
of times.
on the bridge front, the spookiest stories tended not to be those, but the ones that were more associated with the suicide bridge. They usually have some pretty dark tales about them.
I would think. Just, I mean, yeah, there's a cherry thought. It's like, no, that's a bridge where somebody committed suicide. Yeah. Which makes you think of, it's like Golden Gate, which has a huge number of suicides every year.
Yeah. Well,
The most ever. Yeah.
Well, I think that's something about people is that's where those stories tend to come up, and that's why I think you find so many urban legends that are similar or have the same elements like all over the place, and it's always like, oh, I heard it from a guy who heard from the person it actually happened.
The urban legend.
Yeah. And a lot of times, no, it's literally just a story that's been passed around.
Though even some of them you'll find if you keep going far enough and trace it back far enough, there is a place somewhere in the country where the legends actually happen to some extent, and it's just
it would be interesting to see like some of those things like tested and find out how many of them are actually true and how many of them are just stories that have been repeated so often that they've taken on.
It reminds me, there's the funny story. There's a bridge in San Antonio, Texas, that's famous for it's a railroad tracks, famous for the kids will push you off of the tracks. And the story I heard back in the early 2000s from an investigation group out there was that the local gangs are well aware of this story, so they'll wait and carjack people when they get out to see the fingerprints on their bumpers.
So that's low. But in Texas, they still have 2 bridges that they claim have trolls living under them. So there's always that.
Now that's something that can be investigated because that would be cool. Actual trolls under bridges.
I've seen trolls, although not under a bridge.
I see trolls all the time. That's what happens when you shop at Walmart.
Well, aside from the trolls, you see quite a lot of them on the internet too.
Oh yes. Many trolls.
Well, wait, you wouldn't want to stay in a haunted room, but you have no problem going out in the middle of the night looking for a troll.
Because I don't think the troll will actually show up. That's my.
That's fun.
I'm much more convinced that ghosts are real, and that's why I don't want to see one or interact with one. The other stuff, it's more like, okay, I don't believe this really exists, so I'm willing to go along with it. If something really happens, I'll be like amazed and fascinated.
Of course, the kicker being, in most ghost folklore, they don't kill you. In troll folklore, they eat you.
Which is why I don't think it's real, because how many police reports do you have of I almost got eaten.
You mean
by
like
a troll?
As opposed to the thousands of reports every year of people that disappear and are never seen again?
Yes, but did they go to a bridge that was supposed to be haunted by trolls?
Possible.
Okay, so wait, I got to explore this a little further then. Okay, so you're cool with the trolls. Okay, what about the bridges where they say sort of a goat man hangs around?
Oh yeah, Goat Man.
Goat Man. Okay, that would just be weird because I'm pretty sure that that's just some homeless guy that's
What about Bunny Man Bridge? I think it's Virginia.
No idea what that is.
Axe murderer in a bunny suit.
Yeah, that's just creepy. I don't. Yeah. See, I can buy that because it's not hard to pick up a bunny suit and an axe. That I can believe. And I'm not taking chances with that.
Well, if we're going to take them sexist, we could always go looking for Chupacabra.
Oh, God.
Well, say, the Bunny Man Bridge at least has some actual documentation behind it.
This
there
is
are
true.
actual newspaper reports of the Bunny Man and actual witnesses and things that you can actually find. It's not just, a story.
Like the Jersey Devil.
Yeah, we're not that far from the Pine Barrens.
Oh, no, we're very familiar with the Jersey Devil, but like I said, most of it is, I've seen things where they traced it back. Yeah, most of it is bunk. It's a story some reporter made up based on something he heard.
I'll say the exorcist I worked with did an exorcism at Leeds Point at one point.
Yeah.
You never know.
If you have it in you to go to an interesting bridge, though, the coolest bridge from the entire book is in Ojai, California, and it's close to Camp Comfort Park. And it's just this nondescript little concrete highway kind of a bridge going across Camp Comfort Creek, and it has just like 1,000 different stories associated with it. Everything from a bus full of kids being killed and their spirits are wandering the area to this entity that they call the Charman.
Oh, yes,
like
I've
a
heard of
burnt-up
Charman.
human being. Yeah, it's been seen walking down the highway, off the road, different areas. And then if that's not enough, you have what they call the Ojai vampire, which is
There you go,
a
Brian.
vampire that's been seen in that area since the late 1800s.
Okay, see, that would interest me because I'm a vampire guy. That's my thing. I write vampire novels.
Another thing.
Oh man, the Ojai vampire story. There's not much to it, but it's pretty interesting because you still have people about every handful of years will say they'll be out there at Camp Creek Park and they'll stumble across either A, what looks like an overgrown black dog that's guarding something, or B, this concrete tomb that's in the ground, and there's no markings on it or anything. But the legend says that they buried this guy for being a vampire in this concrete tomb, so he couldn't escape, and of course that didn't stop him. And now he wanders this area, and so people report seeing the Ojai vampire, seeing his tomb, and oftentimes this dog that presumably guards him while he sleeps.
Interesting.
Well, I would say as well, I've heard the Charman story before, and as I understand it, it may be that one or it may have been another one, but there's at least one story of a Charman that's actually true. What it was is it was a guy who lived in the area who was in fact a burn victim and had been very, very badly burned. And people would see him walking on the road, and he turned into an urban legend over time.
Well, there we go.
I don't know if
most,
I think that might be a different one.
Yeah, I mean, again, so, even aside from the like the Crybaby Bridge, where there's one in every state, you do get the real event, and then it gets copied into other places and certain common motifs.
Yep.
That was definitely a theme in the Haunted Bridges book.
Oh, that. People love stories about bridges, even back in Europe and England. You get a lot of stories based on. I mean, that's where the whole trolls under bridges and stuff like that legends began.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I mean, and going, a good way to sort of bring the conversation back around 100 degrees or 180 degrees is we talked about also in the Civil War, the bridges were often used for executions, for punishing people, and oftentimes battles would happen because they were trying to take a bridge.
Yeah.
So yeah, the bridges have been very important throughout time.
So we're actually over the 7:30 mark, which is fine, but I figured probably a good time to give out the phone number again.
Yeah. I'm going to take a quick break.
Yeah, by all means.
The number is 609-807-2492.
609-807-2492.
Country code 1.
Yep, country code 1. I will say, as a rule, we usually keep the guests for the first hour, and then we'll do a second hour of us shooting the breeze. This is fun, so we're good for the time being, unless you have a pressing need to get somewhere.
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. But so, is there anywhere that you, in all the the Haunted Places book that you wrote, is there anywhere that you know about that you'd really like to go you haven't had a chance to go yet?
For sure, the Winchester House, like you mentioned earlier, I have a fascination with that. I have never gone to any of the big penitentiaries, like you said, Eastern State, or even the Ohio State Reformatory, or even going to say Alcatraz. I never really got to go to any of those, and I would like to do a lot more of that.
Yeah, Eastern was interesting itself. I wouldn't mind doing another one. I've always, ever since I was a kid and I first heard the story, I wanted to go to Winchester. And it killed me because the friend of mine, his name's David. He does a YouTube channel called Lupus Creepus. He lives right near there, and he does the paranormal themed stuff. He was looking for haunted sites in the area to do, and he comes to me to ask about it. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know how close you are to it, but what about Winchester? And he's like, oh, I'm right near there, but they weren't letting anybody in for filming. At the time, maybe.
Well, I think they're very expensive.
This wasn't even.
That'd be one of the contingencies for going there. I think they charge a lot of money for it. And,
True.
That's one of the things I haven't really been, terribly privy to, because when I shot the documentary, it was really much a trade of services sort of thing. Like, hey, come let us, shoot in your house, and we'll plug you on the website and in the movie and all this kind of stuff. And most of them were like, cool. But the places that have a certain status, like Stanley
Yeah.
Hotel, Queen Mary, things like that,
You're gonna pay
they
for
get
it.
bombarded with these requests every day. So
Like-
they figured out to make money off of it.
Eastern, when we did it, we got in for free, but when we did it, the rate was $50 per person per hour, and there was a minimum number of people and a minimum number of hours. My mentor
Right.
had just passed away, and the guy who set the whole thing up was a reporter writing a book about him, so they wound up getting it. The prison let us in for free.
Yeah, and they run a haunted house.
You have
Every,
terror behind the
every year.
walls.
I'm back, by the way. This hour brought to you by the Ojai Vampire. Come out to the coast. Meet the Ojai Vampire.
I'll have to mention that to Lucas when he gets filming again. It's like, oh, hi, there's this bridge. It's got all this crazy stuff. It's even got a vampire.
There we go. I'm gonna incorporate him into my next book.
You should.
Well, since you're into the vampires and you're in that area of the country, so have you actually gone up to the Mercy Brown?
I was just about to
Grave or
say we need to go up there.
That would be cool. That would be like a neat segment to do. Maybe like we could pre-record something and put it on the show.
Filming, yeah.
But yeah, do a thing on because that's America's one really legitimate
Or at least most famous.
vampire.
There are
legend.
others.
There are, but yeah, that one's the most well known and probably the most documented.
True, but I mean, 17th, 18th, particularly 18th, 19th centuries, there was a whole vampire panic that hit New England. Mercy Brown was just part of it, and all of these stories of same thing throughout Europe of somebody gets sick, dies. Now other people start seeing them, and they get sick, and they weaken, and they die, and until finally somebody digs up the body and sets it on fire.
Puts a stick.
And I've
through it.
heard some pretty freaky recordings from that gravesite.
Oh, really?
One of the I think they're called like New England Paranormal or something. They're based out of like Boston. I'm gonna get this wrong. I'm gonna screw it up. If they're listening, I hope they call in and correct me. But
Well, New
they
England's
did, like,
littered with
some recordings
groups.
they were trying to go for EVPs, but they actually heard it in real time. Actually, disembodied voice. They said, and I've heard the audio of it. It sounds like this weird, almost cartoon ghost. Because it does almost have like a kind of sound to it. And they pulled up an old story or rendition of the Mercy Brown story where they would say that she would make sounds that were very similar, reminiscent to the Banshee. And she would sort of make these weird howling sounds when she was prowling the woods or whatever, So, and I do think a lot of that story comes from Irish myth and the Banshee too.
Yes.
This is true. Although it's always the one disappointment for me. So what got me interested in the paranormal as a kid was vampire stories and vampire legends. And all of these years, I've met people who've encountered fairies. I've met people who've encountered demons, ghosts, angels. I even know an exorcist that had an encounter with a werewolf. But I've never met anyone who's had a solid encounter with a vampire.
Because the vampires know better. They keep themselves hidden. It's all documented in my books. They have a society. They have rules. They know what they're doing.
Although I guess that's not entirely true. We did interview Bishop C. Manchester in England, who's a vampire hunter.
Oh God.
But yeah, I'm not entirely convinced.
More of a madman.
Interesting. I
think-
give him that.
I think the idea of running into a vampire to me is more frightening than a ghost because, well, besides the fact that they would drink your blood or something and kill you, but because I think my mind's eye sees a vampire more as like the Nosferatu Barlow from Salem's Lot kind of a dude than Brad Pitt drinking absinthe. That would just scare the crap out of me,
See, my first thought, with a vampire, I mean, it would depend, of course. If it's the the Dracula Salem's Lot, you're going to be a shambling, rotting corpse. Okay,
the actual folklore.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want any part of that. If, on the other hand, you get to be a cool vampire, then sign me up. I would.
So you mean like you would be one of the Lost Boys?
Oh,
You
absolutely.
really wouldn't want to hang out in like ditches.
Hell yeah.
He wants to be Lestat. Let's be honest.
I want to be Lestat. Hell, I'd sell for being Louis. As miserable as he was, he doesn't know how good he's got it.
Right.
Let's be honest. You want
Yeah.
to be your own main character.
I got I've been to that house that they shot in, the Oak Alley Plantation.
Oh, nice.
I mean, that's a really cool haunted spot in New Orleans. If you go down there, it's outside town, so you have to drive a little ways to get to it. But it's well worth the trip, man. If you do a side trip.
They used some really nice locations for that movie. I mean, they got a really good look.
So the one in New Orleans, I'm particularly interested to see. I'm sure you know it. The Law of the Reef House.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's like that woman was freaky.
Well, it's interesting. We were actually going to try to shoot there when we went to New Orleans because sort of the shooting schedule on the early episodes with the Japanese folks was we would go around whatever town that we were in, and I would just kind of do this almost like a haunted tour thing and tell them about this place and that place and this place, and then we would end up at wherever we were staying at, and I would talk about that place, and then we, of course, would do the typical ghost hunter staking out the room all night thing. And when we went to New Orleans, this was Nicolas Cage had just sold the Lalaurie house to the private individual who owns it now. And she was basically of that camp that I was talking about that does not embrace the haunted history, does not want anything to do with it, didn't want to talk about it, and actually, blew the whole story off and everything. Even though that one is very steep in reality.
I was like, of all the houses to buy in the United States,
exactly
that house, and you're going to blow it off? Why would you buy it?
Exactly, yeah. If you don't want a haunted house, don't buy a haunted house. There's got to be
Well, I'll say this. Number one, it's gorgeous. And number two, it's in a very nice spot in the French Quarter. I mean, it is in a primo spot.
Which is understandable, but I mean, even setting aside the ghost side of it, the horrible reputation, the things that woman did to her slaves. Why do you want this house except to go ghost hunting to me?
Yeah.
And read some of the stories that Nick Cage, wrote about with the few times that he stayed there. I mean, he had some pretty interesting experiences in that place. So,
apparently Nick Cage
it wouldn't be beneath someone also just to buy it because Nicolas Cage owned it.
Yeah, true. And of
course,
going back, we all know that
Nick was a vampire. Surprise when she actually stayed there, though.
Well, there's photographic proof that Nicolas Cage is a vampire, along with Keanu Reeves.
Right. I've seen,
you've seen that meme, right?
Yes, that's awesome.
If anyone out there listening has no idea what we're talking about, if you Google Nick Cage vampire, there's a picture from like the 19th century of someone who looks a lot like Nick Cage.
Oh yeah, there's like this like the old West or Civil War photograph, and it looks like it's Nicolas Cage standing there. I mean, it's literally.
And pun intended, he's been cagey about suggesting it was him.
Yeah. Yes.
Granted, if I've had a photo of that like me, I totally play off that. No, it's actually me. I've been around that long.
Oh yeah. I'd use that to promote. Are you kidding me? If I could find an old timey photo that looks like me, I'd be like, hell yeah, this is me.
Kevin Mears, Immortal Ghost Hunter.
Yes.
Or it's always on my website, and I'll regale you with tales of drinking absinthe.
Well, you don't need to go back 100 years to do that. Some of the events we do have.
No, yeah.
Guys, I got a question for you. You remember the show The Night Stalker?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember Kolchak? There was a one with Richard Anderson. Richard Anderson was the guy that was in $6 Million Man. He played the $6 Million Man's friend that was helping him get the surgeries and stuff.
Okay.
Well, it was about him being old. If you remember, I don't remember the whole series, but this one particular episode, I mean, your friend might even know about it, was where he came back and he had to drink the blood every 8 years of his victims to live another 100 years. So he's been doing it since the 1800s.
Oh, okay. That was the original movie, wasn't it?
No, that wasn't the movie. The original movie was the one, the vampire one.
Right. That's what I thought.
That was with Kolchak. That was
one of the later.
This is the series, this episode, where they were in, I believe it was Chicago, and they had the older cities underneath the city.
Yeah, there's
that they went in,
Yeah.
and it was a really, really good episode. And it just talks about what you're saying,
Mhm.
how I don't know how they did the research on it, but the guy was actually a doctor. That was Richard Anderson. Do you remember this, Rich at all?
I remember that. I mean, I remember that episode, but I don't remember much of the details about it because it's literally been probably 20 years since I saw Night
me
Stalker.
too, and that's kind of why
I've seen it more recently, but I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
Because the one friend of mine who's sadly on the passed away list had been given the licensing rights and done a couple of Kolchak stories, very good Kolchak stories.
Oh, nice.
And reading his, I went, oh, you knew him as well, CJ.
Oh, yeah, C.J. Henderson.
But reading one of his novels, which was about Kolchak, having never seen the TV series, I went, this is really cool. And I went back to watch the movies and the TV series.
Right, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube or anywhere. But this one particular
I think
episode
it was on
great.
Netflix for years. I don't know if it's
Yeah, it
still
was. But this one particular episode was really, really cool because it went back and, like I said, they had to find out who was, extracting the blood out of these victims, and then and they did that. Wally Cox was in it. If you remember Wally Cox, he's a little guy that was with the glasses, and he was funny. See, I remember the character actors from that years because that's 60s and 70s when they were on To Tell the Truth and all these game shows.
You're also a bit older than I am.
Yeah, well, there you go. I'm 56, so I remember a little bit more. But it was one of them shows where it really depicted exactly what you're saying, how people come back every so many years to regain their life, over and over and over again, and then live, for another 100 years. So it was one of them episodes that's really, really cool. So check it out when you can. Like Rich said, he remembers some of it, but I just want to throw that out there.
Any of our callers, remember, feel free to call in and remind us 609-807-2492.
I'm pretty sure that's where the X-Files got their idea. They did a riff on that in the first season with a guy named Toombs.
Toombs, and he did a couple episodes, right?
Yeah, he was in 2 episodes, and he was one of their first. He was their first monster of the week, and he would come back like every 18 years or every 20 something years, and he would have to eat
organs,
5 livers. Yeah, he would eat people's livers, and he would squeeze into places and stuff. But
well, keep in mind, Chris Carter, the creator of X-Files, has more than once said that Kolchak the Night Stalker was a major influence on the series.
Oh yeah, they even got they tried. They did eventually get Darren McGavin to guest star, but they tried to get him for a long time. They wanted him to play Mulder's father originally, but he turned them down.
I was just thinking there was also the one season failed attempt to bring it back as well.
Yes, yeah, they tried to get Stuart Townsend to play, and they just totally went in the wrong direction.
It was interesting, but it wasn't the Night Stalker.
No. Well, what was fun about the Night Stalker was that Kolchak was kind of a goofy, fun, bumbling character. And they didn't, in the remake, they tried to make him all cool and dark and edgy and emo. He was Mr. Edgelord or whatever.
Because everything has to be dark and edgy these days.
Well, it was back when they did it. Yeah,
even now things have to be dark.
Yeah, they got him I think right off of doing that terrible Queen of the Damned movie and had him in there, and it was just oh, stop.
The coolest Night Stalker one that I remember is, and I don't remember the exact plot of it, but basically it involved a witch, and the lady who played the witch was actually the same actor who played Angelique from Dark Shadows.
Oh, wow.
And so she was sort of rehashing a witch role from Dark Shadows, but in Kolchak. And it was really cool.
It's always fun when they have those little nods, to do that. Going back to the X-Files did that all the time. They used to do sort of very subtle in-joke casting. They would get guest stars who had been in UFO movies or sci-fi movies, years and years back to play, characters and things. And there goes the other book.
Well, there's one more to knock over.
Yeah. Well, that's the thickest one. I think that's got the best chance of staying up.
I may have to just physically push it over just for the sake of symmetry before the show.
That'll be the end of the show. We'll just knock all the books off the table. This is what I get for trying to do like product placement.
I think a lot of people would probably be a little leery too of Kolchak coming back because you've always got that danger, kind of like when they redid, Dark Shadows,
Mhm.
that they're going to sort of
Screw it up.
ruin it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, remaking anything is always kind of a roll of the dice because you're never sure. Like, I mean, apparently the A-Team, they did that movie remake, and it didn't do all that well. I happen to like it. I thought, okay, this is about as good as you can do, taking that material and remaking it. But it's another thing. It's you never know what's going to hit.
Well, I'll
Some
say-
people hate Dark Shadows. I thought it was funny, but then again, I wasn't a huge fan of the original show, so kind of doing a campy, humorous remake worked for me because,
I'll say the best
Right.
remakes I've seen. Some of the best remakes I've seen are usually the written ones. Or again, CJ did the Black and Evil Truth, which was the Carl Kolchak novel, and it's really good because it's like, no, this is somebody who knew the character, knew the personalities, and knew the mythos, and really made the effort to work everything in. And then he did a pair of graphic novels, one of which was a very funny, let's summon the elder horror type of thing, which goes exactly as horribly as it sounds.
Let's all summon Cthulhu.
And then
Let's all summon Cthulhu.
Well, specifically, it was like this, and he did it as a graphic novel, and he did a short story. This reality TV show host finds a necromancer to summon an old one. And the TV show brings Carl on as like a technical advisor. And he's like, don't do this. Every story I've ever heard about the Necronomicon ends really badly. And of course, the necromancer summons him. Everything goes to heck. The thing starts devouring people's souls. And it's just like, I told you. Why didn't you listen?
That almost
I'm
sounds
pretty
like
interested
the
in the new version of the Entity that's being produced right now.
I hadn't heard about that.
Just what I've been kind of reading behind the scenes, that they really went back and actually talked to those original two investigators, Barry Taff and Terry Gaynor, and got a lot more details about the case. And even I can't remember the name of the author of the book of the Entity, but they went back to him and really mined him for some more, lesser known details about the actual, the haunting and the events around the Entity.
Yeah.
And so far, it really looks like everything they're putting into it to make it to an actual movie we might actually really love.
Yeah. See, to me, the whole point of doing a remake is if you can bring something new to it, or something that like doing a remake of, It, for example, to use the most recent, the Stephen King book. Okay, you can do a remake of that and actually make it better, because the original was a 1990s TV miniseries that there was a
It was
lot
a
of
shoestring, but not a whole big budget or anything.
no, it wasn't a big budget. It also had a lot of restrictions on content and whatnot because of the TV format. So, there's a lot of room there where you can say, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to really do the book justice. You could remake The Shining for the same reason, saying, okay, we're not remaking Kubrick's movie. We're remaking, a version.
They did that with The Shining. The results were,
miniseries,
were mixed.
It was. I mean, I liked it.
As did I.
As far as being more faithful to the book, there were elements that, of course, again, it was a TV miniseries. Some of that showed through, and there were elements that could have been done a little better. But like Salem's Lot, much better the second time around. The TNT miniseries versus the original.
I would say the first half was very good.
I have to go with the first one.
The second half, in my opinion, the miniseries, the first half of the miniseries was very solid. The second one, not so much. But then again, that might just be how far
the original one from Tobe Hooper is like one of my earliest horror movie memories.
Yeah,
watching that on TV and being terrified of the little floating kid vampires outside the window scratching.
Yes, that was probably
one of my earliest, most frightening memories.
that was the one really effective scene that he did well. The problem is if you go back and rewatch it, again, you suddenly start to see like, wow, this thing is really corny in places, and I don't know. I preferred the more recent adaptation. Not saying it was perfect, but I preferred it as far as a version of the book that was a little more accurate. I do
you also like the more charismatic type of a vampire. So
yes,
you dug Rutger Hauer versus Barlow. So,
I did, yeah.
I'm the first one.
I can't hide that I'm a big Rutger Hauer fan.
I liked Rutger as Barlow, but I have to go with Rich. I prefer the original movie, especially because my problem with the remake was the first half of it was so well done and so faithful in adaptation, and then the second half just went completely off the reservation.
I wouldn't say it went completely. It changed a couple of...
It changed major details.
It did change a couple of major elements, and that was the one thing that I would nitpick. I didn't like what they did with like Father Callahan.
They turned him into a vampire in the end of it.
Yeah, and I thought that was silly. There was no need to do that. Just to have like the little bookend story that they used. The original was better for that, but. Again, it's kind of a mixed. It's always a mixed bag. You pick your poison or whatnot. But when it comes to remakes, that's my rule is if you can bring something legitimately new to it, if you can be more faithful to the source material, or you can, do
I want to say the
better.
original Entity movie was a TV movie as well.
Was it?
I could be wrong.
But I think you're wrong on that because there's a lot of nudity.
Okay, probably wrong.
That's right. That's
a
why
lot of Barbara Hershey nudity.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
That was kind of its big selling point.
I'm lacking in the sleep department just now, but I would say I am interested. I did not know they were doing a remake. I am interested to see it. It always amused me being more of the demonologist and the ghost hunter watching this, and it's like, yes, this is a textbook example of why parapsychologists don't do well with a demon case. Because they have no idea. It's not a ghost. They have no idea what to do with it.
Right, and Gaynor and Taft were really, it's almost, I don't want to say a slap, but a little bit of a slap maybe to call them just a ghost hunter, because these guys are, have doctorates in
they're actual legitimate parapsychologists.
USC and they were really into the parapsychology side of it.
Yeah,
and you're right though, they did really tackle it as a ghost story, and got some surprises out of that.
Yeah, it's like this isn't a tradition. It isn't a ghost. I'll say this from my area of expertise. What the woman describes is literally textbook incubus, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And while I have the utmost respect for Dr. Taft and Gaynor and the work that they did as parapsychologists, because they're very respectable scientists who did excellent work. My personal feeling from talking to, I think it was Gaynor that we had on, I could be wrong, and from watching the movies, it's like these guys are completely out of their depth.
Well, also you got to figure Hollywood changes some stuff, so the movie might not be.
Yeah, but again, I actually got to speak to one of them, and it's like,
okay,
it is kind of you have the tape measure to figure it out, but you need to do something about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the double-edged sword, though, with working with people like that, is because they bring a lot of clout with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when they say something's happening, more people pay attention. They managed to get popular photography to come out to evaluate a Polaroid and declare it, the most authentic photograph of a ghost ever taken.
And they ran it in the magazine.
Yeah.
Right, and so because it has such a strong reputation in the scientific community, but the bad side of that is because they're really laymen when it comes to dealing with anything paranormal, that they're going to sort of botch a lot of things and mislabel a lot of things, and maybe even not even appropriately handle what's happening around them. So it's just one of those things, It
was my reaction. It's like, especially because having talked to him. Last I heard, the woman was still having experiences. It had tapered off, but it didn't stop. It's like, for goodness sakes, why doesn't somebody get this woman a priest?
Oh, yeah, that's why I was saying earlier, if you go and read some of her accounts that she's actually now documented.
Mhm.
And I believe if you get the newest version of the entity, the book, it has like some like addendums added on.
Okay.
Some of the reports and things that she's putting out are just stuff from horror movies. I see why they're making this movie, because she talks about, almost like a little army of little, looking like blackened dwarves almost, that come in and hold her down. And then this bizarre entity will come in that has a misshapen face that she says looks almost Asian. And he sort of is like the evil entity controlling it all.
Yeah, they're the minions, and he's the main power.
Yeah, and the first-hand account stuff that never made it into the first movie is far more frightening than, say the second half of the original Entity movie, where we're basically seeing her in that glass cage room, and then you get the because the ghost is hitting the glass or something.
And that freaky soundtrack.
I totally see the new movie's going to be a lot more frightening.
Yeah, although again, still for me, it's like I've had experiences like this woman's describing. I've talked to people. I know exactly what's going on, and it's like things can be done about this. Why is somebody not doing something?
I think. Well, I don't know much about. I know her name's Doris.
Yeah, if I could run her down, I would. And say, okay, let's get you help. Let's get rid of it.
You would think.
Well, I think she's been on the record as being not religious. And so she's sort of like one of the very vocal, doesn't want anything religious or any sort of a priest or anything having anything to do with her. And I think that's been one of the reasons that maybe that, some of the things are happening you're talking about. The other thing is she's been so bombarded, I think, since that was the late 70s.
Yeah.
By people who have sort of came at this in a scientific sort of a way, that's all she knows. I think she's of the frame of mind, she's never going to get rid of these things.
That's the problem I see, and it's one of the reasons, welcome to one of the basic reasons I do this, is people get into this mindset that there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm here to tell you, yeah, there is. There are, the Catholic Church is the one everybody thinks of, but every major religion in the world has been confronting this kind of act, exactly what Doris is describing, for thousands of years. There is something that can be done, and I love and respect the parapsychologists too, because I have that scientific curiosity at heart, that desire to prove, that I think fuels the parapsychologist's mindset. So I respect that, but at the end of the day, you got to put away the tape measure and do something.
Call the guy from the History Channel. Aliens.
No, demons.
The first book I wrote was called The Devil in the Delta, and it was about a case that I worked on in Mississippi, and it's exactly what you're talking about, which was because I always would have these people come up and say, I really want to be ghost hunters. And you're thinking, oh, you mean you want to wear black T-shirts and go hang around in places that are really cool, and you can all have, some cheap thrills.
Run around with some green night
but you're not prepared to deal with an actual private case where you go in and the people actually want answers.
Yeah.
Or they want actually something done. Or they want to know, what to do about this, stuff like that. And, it's one of those things, like, I literally, everything that happened in that case was so off the wall and so difficult to even categorize, much less try to amend in any way, that I treated it as basically a cautionary tale for would-be ghost hunters.
So I don't want you to spoil the book, obviously, but tell us a little bit about that case. What happened?
I have a feeling Kevin's going to be reading this book.
Yeah.
Well, we basically had a woman who lived in a double-wide trailer in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, who claimed that she had a demon in her trailer.
Okay.
And she would explain different types of activity. But as I would go down there, it was about a 4-hour drive for me from Memphis. So I would go down there on weekends working with one of these Mississippi paranormal groups. And what unfolded over several months was she did have real activity happening there, but then she would lie about a lot of things. And then on top of that, she would exacerbate things. Like she would say, we have no idea why these ghosts are bothering us. But then you'd go in the next room and there would be a Ouija board drawn on the floor. And well, you didn't do this.
Oh, let's start Kevin on the Ouija board.
Yeah, things like
There we go.
she would be totally sane one second, explaining activity that was happening in the house, and you could actually go in and experience some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the very next, she'd say, well, I really don't know, why this demon isn't talking to you because it's watching you right now. And I'd say, really? And she'd say, yeah, it's right there. And she'd point on the wall, and there would be like a fly sitting on the wall behind.
Oh, Lord.
And so I would reach up and swat the fly and go, so is it gone now?
This is the problem when you
But,
have
like-
mental illness and,
And worse than that, meth,
blurring.
the lady was doing drugs. There was drug paraphernalia in the house. But the weird thing about this case, and the reason I was felt compelled to write the book, was every time you'd be willing to sort of write her off as just being crazy,
Something would happen.
you would have real activity happen.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for instance, as soon as I walked in the environment, they claimed that one night they were watching TV, and the TV literally exploded in the room while they were watching it.
This is
It caught
sounding
on fire.
familiar.
So they ran over, grabbed the TV, threw it through the front window of the trailer into the front yard. And so, like, when I actually got there, the TV was still lying there, burnt up, shattered, lying in the front yard. And so, like, when I walked in, they would tell you something like this, and you'd be like, yeah, or it was a malfunctioning TV, and you completely overreacted. And you would sort of, like, laugh about it, but then we went into this room where she said one night they were sitting in the living room. This was before the TV blew up. They were watching the television, and all of a sudden, all of the drawers flew out of the dressers, the bed flipped into the air, all the clothes dumped out. They were so frightened of this room that they just took a blanket, hung it over the doorway, and no one went in there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so the very first trip I made there, I immediately went to that room.
Of course.
Went
That's
in
what you
with
do.
one of the, of course, and one of the other investigators. We sat in the room, and I'm literally like, I mean, you met this lady. It's just the way she even spoke, just radiated craziness. And so, we're sitting in this room, and I'm thinking, I'm going to humor her, and I'm going to do this investigation. And the very first question I say is there anyone here in this room with me? Can you make a sound? And would you believe the entire room shook?
I believe you.
So, and I actually have an audio recording. It's on our website, paranormalincorporated.com. You can pull up Double in the Delta and listen to the recording of it, because you'll actually
I'll
hear
be
the
doing
surprise
this.
in my voice, and I'm like, oh, shit. Something actually happened.
You've got a demon case. I mean, you've got...
It was, you have to just read it. I mean, one minute you'd be convinced of one thing, and it would be something else. But this is also part of the reason why I think people underestimate when they do private cases as a quote-unquote ghost hunter, because your need to categorize it and sort of attach a certain kind of activity to a certain type of thing can kind of work against you.
This is true, but there's also as I like to put it, because I lecture to a lot of people, and often I will lecture to. I'm Christian, as you can probably guess by now, but a lot of the people I lecture to aren't. I've had people go, "Well, how are you sure it's a demon as opposed to a fairy, as opposed to a this or that or the other?" And at the end of the day, I'm a really pragmatic kind of guy, so I tend to divide it between: is it threatening and dangerous, or is it not threatening and dangerous? If it's threatening or dangerous, I tend to just call it a demon and get on with dealing with the problem. Although the activity levels you're talking about, yeah, assuming that she didn't make it up, ghosts as a rule don't blow up television sets. That's a whole other power level.
Unless they really
Right,
hate
and
the
I
show
even
that's on.
go, I guess because I do deal with so many different people,
Mhm.
different beliefs and things like that, but I go with almost a more generic version of that, which is this a haunting, or is there some sort of a negative entity here? And
I would agree with that.
yeah, you're right. Some of the things that are happening there would definitely point at more of sort of a negative sort of an
So,
entity.
I think it sounds like you. I mean, again, being a Christian, and I certainly accept there's lots of other names for it, but I'm kind of call the spade a spade thing, and I call the negative, and I don't call a negative an entity. I call it a demon. I don't have objections to people who do. I'm just happy when people are willing to acknowledge it exists, as opposed to people who think it's all fluffy, happy shininess, which drive me up the bloody wall. But
Shiny, happy
what you run
demon.
into is that just because it's one thing doesn't mean it's not something else. That I've done cases that have demonic phenomena that have ghosts hanging out in the house too, or elementals. I've done, and in case in point, with this lady, you're talking about, yeah, she sounds like she was a couple short of a six-pack, and she had a legitimate spirit phenomenon.
Which makes it tough when you have that combination.
The two are by no
That's
means
right,
mutually
yeah.
exclusive.
Right.
You know, my mentor did a case in Rhode Island with a guy who had been like the head professor of microbiology for the state at one time. Very genius guy into like the worst forms of occultism. Basically, everything under the sun in occultism you can think of, he was into it. And all of like the normal stuff like tarot cards and stuff, he was doing it all backwards. Deliberately doing it on backwards. And this guy was out of his bloody mind. I mean, I'll put it like this. And when he did lectures, he had slides, and he'd show slides where this guy had big white charts on the wall. And every day when he ate something, being so smart and being so, I guess, obsessive, I don't know what to call it, he'd walk over, he'd write what he ate and the exact molecular content of every piece of food he ever had.
That sounds like a form of OCD.
But
Yeah,
neurosis.
for sure.
you know, this guy, you know, and he talked about how veggie vampires were after him, and the devil would speak to him through the toilet. And he was.
I know that's where I go to talk to the devil. You know?
And it would like
For sure.
splash water. The devil
Right.
would splash water up on him, all of which is clearly completely. You know, it's like I believe it's crazy stuff, but this guy's clearly out of his mind.
Oh my god!
But-
The devil's
Well,
bidet.
yeah,
On the other
what
hand-
do you do when you have a combination of crazy stuff like that being shot at you,
Yeah.
but then there's real things happening?
Exactly, and that's the other side of it. Is you know they'd see tables flying across the room and stuff that crazy people don't move objects without touching them. That's not a natural
Right.
phenomenon.
Psychos don't burst into flames in the sun. I don't care how crazy they are.
But
Well, I will say, like, I mean, one of the very first things, I mean, you know, like I say, when you do private cases, you know, people want some sort of resolution.
yeah,
And, you know, so one of the very first questions I asked her was, you know, are you religious? You know, like, you know, if you are, you know, what denomination, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And she literally said, well, I believe everything.
oh, I've had that too.
And so I was just kind of left, you know, a little flabbergasted by that. But when the entire thing was sort of over with, I asked her bluntly, well, would you feel better if I had someone come in and do, you know, some sort of a house blessing or something
Mhm.
for you? Because, you know, I'm trying to think very generically since she's not,
Yeah.
you know, giving me any kind of denomination or religion or anything.
She's saying
She's like, yeah, I probably would feel better. And so I literally had to pull a Episcopal priest, a minister from 2 states away because he was the only one willing to come do it.
Episcopals
to
are
come
usually
over
one of the
and
better
do this
choices.
blessing on her trailer. And he had a bit of an experience too that I put in the book.
I
So
believe it.
it's yeah.
And I will say, so you know, and my audience, I think, hopefully has figured this out by now. You know, I talk a lot of Christian stuff. In reality, you know, if I go into a Buddhist's house and they need a house blessing,
Yeah.
I don't come back with a Catholic priest. I come back with a Buddhist.
Right.
Well, right, exactly.
You know, in my opinion, the rituals and the names that we give things are far less important than the belief system behind it, and the
Right.
power of it's that power of faith.
Well, that's actually one of the things I've made to put in my Ghost Hunting for Beginners book was, first off, I always caution people, like, you know, first of all, figure out what kind of ghost hunter you really want to be. If you're the kind of person you want to go stay at the Stanley Hotel and have cool experiences, that's cool. More power to you. Do that
Yeah.
stuff. But
And
if
there's
you're
tons
going
of
to be the
places to
type
go.
that you're going to go do
Mhm.
like private cases and
Mhm.
work with individuals, you know, first off, you can't walk in that household and start trying to shove your beliefs and your things on these people.
Absolutely
You got to
right.
walk in and be, you know, open-minded, hear what they believe, what they do. Otherwise, the stuff you do is going to have no effect. I mean, if you're a Christian and you walk in and go, I'm going to do this Muslim clearing kind of a thing on you, they're probably going to be like,
You're crazy.
yeah, I don't have any faith in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's
I
like
agree
Kevin,
completely.
Kevin says that pretty much during his lectures. He goes into the discussion of like what the 3 different types of demonologists or 4 different types are,
And the types of
and why and all of that. But yeah, he talks about that a lot.
this is
in
the
his
first time
lecture.
I've been able to talk to a fellow investigator. I'm sort of curious to see your opinion on this, Rich. So the way I look at it, I kind of see like 4 categories of investigator. I see you have the ghost hunter. To me, the ghost hunter is kind of that guy going to the historical site who wants to see something.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily fault that. That's cool. Then you have what I would, more what I consider the paranormal investigators who are like, okay, I've seen it, now I want to document it. I want evidence.
Right.
You have the parapsychologists, which are the Taft and the other guys who actually have formal degrees and are academics. And then you have the people like me that are like, okay, we've documented it, now let's go fix it.
You're sort of the mechanic, you're the plumber of the demon world. It's like you're not interested so much in why it's there. You're just like, well, here's how we unclog your drain.
I also, strangely enough, it's like I want the proof to a point, because to get any type of clergy involved, if I can't prove there's something in the house, they're not going to listen to me.
Yeah.
But
right.
If I found tomorrow proof positive that the spirit world existed, I'm not sure I'd go public.
Right.
Partly because
I don't necessarily try to sort of micro parcel out the different types of ghost hunters, but I do talk about a lot, especially in like the ghost hunting for beginners. My experience has been any ghost hunting group that you encounter will be one of three different kinds of groups, and it'll be either A, we're the scientific types, and we want to get things on audio recorders and on video recorders, and we want what we would call evidence to present to someone. And then you have, group number two would be people who are like more interested in like psychics. But they're going to use some sort of a version of a psychic who's going to tell you who's there and what's going on and this sort of thing. And then the third sort of group is more of a religious space, where they're sort of quantifying the activity to be something involved with something religious, and they're going to approach it more as something they're being demonic, say, or jinn, or whatever some of the equivalents of that.
And I don't want to give you the wrong impression for myself. It's like I'm somewhere between that first and third group, because people who call I call myself a demonologist. People who call me are usually not the people having residual haunting. I'm not the guy, when you look at my title, I'm not the guy you call for that. It's not that I don't acknowledge that those things exist. I've done cases where it's like, you've got a ghost. There's nothing dangerous here. It's just a ghost. If you want, there are ways we can help them cross over. But otherwise, you can let it be. It's not a big deal. It's just, my focus isn't that kind of case. I've had those experiences. And my two concerns, if we could ever prove the existence of the spirit world in an objective, absolutely scientific sense, claim Randy's $1 million pies when it was such a thing kind of deal, one, you'd have death threats and people who thought you were some sort of messiah, which I don't want. And two, you'd have, the practical implications of, we just proved to the entire world that there's a spirit world out there that you can go talk to. People are going to go do that, and I'm going to make my life more unpleasant when people go talking to the things they don't want to talk to, and somebody has to fix it.
Oh, come on, though.
Especially with the most common way.
For $1 million, totally worth it. You can buy a lot of peace of mind.
Well, one, that challenge is actually over, and for another, there's all sorts of other problems with it.
I know.
We'll say, hey, every time I'm on coast to coast, I have to deal with about 2 weeks of crazy emails. So I think I can handle it for $1 million.
Exactly. Also, you guys forgot the fourth type of paranormal investigator, the guys with the proton packs that show up.
I ain't afraid no ghosts.
Yeah. Just show up and blow the shit out of your hotel and.
Well, see, that's always my favorite. So most ghost hunters I talk to, paranormal investigators, etc., everybody's like, well, I grew up in a haunted house. That's why I want to do this. I want to understand what happened to me. You know why I got involved? I saw the movie Ghostbusters as a kid. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And it's like, okay, I want to do that with my life.
Yeah, he decided that was going to be his job.
For sure, man. I think like that's got to be one of the most common threads running through ghost hunters. Well, nowadays, you got it because of the show Ghost Hunters.
Yep.
Yeah.
So many people watch the show Ghost Hunters that they're just like,
and
wow,
the million
that's
other
badass,
ones.
Yep.
And that's why you have so many, black T-shirt wearing groups that just really, they're thrill seekers,
Yep.
They just want to go have some cool experiences, but they learned just enough from watching Ghost Hunters that they should probably run an audio recorder and carry a camera.
Yeah. Oh, tell me. See, I've been working.
They know just enough to be dangerous.
I've been working on my own how-to book, specifically for Okay, because you have all these very good books about how to investigate a regular haunting, but in my opinion, there's a lack of books of, okay, you've got a violent haunting, what do you do about it? So I've been wanting to write a how-to book, particularly for investigators who have the experience with the regular types of hauntings, and then they find something violent, and they go, oh crap, I don't know what to do.
We should get on that, considering you probably already have a publisher.
I've got a couple of chapters of it already done and edited and everything even, but and that's kind of where that classification system I was talking about came out of. It's like I was writing the first chapter. My first chapter is about, well, okay, you want to get into ghost hunting? Why? Why are you doing? And not necessarily to lecture people and say you're getting into it for the wrong reason, but to say, if you're going to do this, and I'm sure Rich will agree, you need to understand what your motivations are, and you need to tailor what you do. If you just want to go see ghosts, go stay at a haunted hotel. Don't go and do private cases.
Right. No, I'm 100% with you on that. To me, that's the dividing thing. Like, a lot of ghost, groups do believe that doing private cases sort of propels them to the next level. But they just don't know what comes with that, what it's like to stand there and walk into a house, and they don't want to see, a group of 8, young people walk in with black T-shirts on that's got some like horror movie looking screen print on the front, and coming in, and not going to be really so much caring about what's happening to the family there and their story as much as they just want to see a ghost
and how cool they think they are.
Yeah,
I always say.
So I mean,
one of the best, and for I'm sure you would agree, and for that matter, anyone budding ghost hunters listening to this, I'll give you the piece of advice I was given the first time I went into a private home. Because all my life I'd been doing public sites as a kid. This is the first time I went with an actual group into a private home. The advice I was given on how to dress, although I kind of already knew, is dress like you're going to a funeral. That level of professionalism and respect. And I get the T-shirt thing, and if you're gonna do a public site, if you're gonna do a convention, totally do the T-shirts. But I think if you're gonna go into somebody's private home, you should be, a nice button-up shirt and slacks at the very least. If
try
not
to have some
suit jacket and
professionalism.
tie.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, a great example was once I had written a few of these books and worked on some few private cases and things like that. I got called to some old friends in Missouri who had a particular ghost problem happening. When I went there, it was a husband and a wife. The wife was saying that she was hearing and seeing things around the house. She was convinced, was a ghost of a young boy, but she was kind of, I could tell she was holding something back. She wasn't telling me all the info. And she was telling me all about this. And then, once she got sort of done, her husband kind of came over and said their young son had drowned out back. And she had been seeing a psychiatrist for the last 2 years to deal with this boy's death. And now this was just another manifestation of her desire to see her dead son, that she was now convinced that, something ghostly was happening in this house.
Yeah. And
we did an investigation all night, never saw a thing, never got a thing, hours and hours and hours of audio, video, all that stuff, nothing. But, think of the groups, though, that would have went in there, and the first time they heard the ice machine kick on, or they would have heard the smallest thing, and they would have ran and told that lady, yep, there's a ghost here, and undone 2 years of
psychiatric counseling. No, I'm with you 100%. I always found... It's funny. So normally whenever I brought a team into a house and worked with other teams, always button-up shirts, slacks, ties, suit jackets, very professional looking. There was always one exception and it ties into exactly what you're saying, which was I had the one friend who we always referred to him as Joe or Joseph. He usually showed up in bib overalls splattered in paint. And the reason he did that is he was the priest that I worked with. And if we walked into a house like that, where it was the person's grief, it was the person's psychiatric problems, whatever, we didn't want them to see a priest in a full Roman collar walk through that front door and go, oh God, it's Satan himself. We didn't want that freak out. So he downplayed who he was as much as he could. And, normally I walk into a case, if somebody contacts me for a case, they know who I am. When I've done cases where I've advised other groups, It's like, hi, I'm Kevin Mears. I'm an investigator. I came in to help out. I don't tell them, oh, I'm a demonologist. Da 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 da. Low key, Jessica's. You don't know what you're walking into. You might be dealing with a woman who's grieving over the loss of her child. You might be. I had a woman email me who her daughter had PMDD, and the medication wasn't working, and she thought that it was okay. The medication's not working. Maybe my daughter's possessed by a demon, and I'm like, okay, but first, why don't you talk to the psychiatrist about the fact the medication's not working? Not telling her she was wrong, not telling her daughter was crazy, just saying, in all ethical consciousness, I have to suggest, since you have nothing she described to me was paranormal. It was just, she's pissed at God, she's constantly angry, she rebels against authority figures, all of which sounds like PMDD. You need to talk to your
teenager.
Well, it was much more extreme than that.
Okay.
But you need to talk to your psychiatrist about your medications before you call the exorcist.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, even when we were able to sit down with this particular lady and say, look, nothing, we got nothing.
Yeah.
We don't see anything happening here. We understand you've had a rough 2 years. You need to maybe take a step back and just, be grateful that he passed and he moved on.
Yeah.
And
he's in a better place.
Funny because, her husband was just so visibly relieved that we weren't coming and saying they were haunted, because he knew
it
was going to destroy all the counseling that she had for the past 2 years. But she also had that sort of huge sigh of relief, almost like, okay, I think I can just move on now. Like, I think I can just get past this.
Yeah, and it's an important
like
thing.
I say, I just think of how many groups would have walked in there.
How many groups walk into places
in the
just
dark,
like
heard the
that?
ice machine, and been like, it's a ghost.
Yeah. Well, because they want it to be a ghost. They don't care what it really is. They have a confirmation bias already.
Or when another good example is when the Conjuring movie came out.
Oh God, yeah.
And people going up to Connecticut, to Rhode Island, where it happened, the case actually happened, finding the grave of this woman Bathsheba and vandalizing it. And it's like, you can't do that. I don't care what. I don't. As I understand it, the movie made that part up. I don't care if the movie made that part up or not. You can't go vandalizing graves. It's just disgusting.
Yeah.
And kind of dumb.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't really solve anything.
Yeah. Well, also, no, they weren't trying to do it because they were trying to resolve the haunting. They wanted you had kids doing it who wanted a ghost. They wanted to have the demon show up, and it's like, no. You anyone out there with any kind of equally stupid ideas? Let's clarify. You start vandalizing gravestones, demons don't show up. Police officers show up. There's laws about that.
Exactly.
And ghost hunting is not a defense.
I never understand on that particular case, especially that you have the people who become convinced, of course, that case is authentic and everything, mainly because of the Warrens. But also, you take that particular case, you had the Perron family, on the record, saying that nothing happened. But then they'll turn around and do an extra for the DVD for the movie.
Yeah.
Basically say, stuff happened.
I've heard so many different things.
They're just so untrustworthy anymore as an eyewitness to their own story.
Well, I'll say this. I don't know the Perron family. I don't know much about the case. My mentor, the late Lou Gentili, was Ed's last student. So I have a high degree of respect for the Warrens themselves. I don't know that case in particular, so I can't comment on it. I can comment on the second one, which is the Enfield.
The Perrons, I think they went so far as to sue the Warrens, I believe, on that case, didn't they?
I think
that was one of the ones that was it was a lawsuit.
I honestly don't know. I know that, from my understanding, they had experiences. Ed and Lorraine were involved for a while, and eventually Ed and Lorraine, they dropped Ed and Lorraine from the investigation and went on their own. I know supposedly as well, yes, the woman was supposed to have been possessed when the Warrens got involved, but she got possessed before they were involved. It wasn't something that happened while they were doing the investigation. As well as Lorraine has openly denied that Ed would have ever performed an exorcism since he wasn't a priest. Although, funny enough, from an actual priest, I do have confirmation that in the unusual circumstances of the movie, Ed could have done an exorcism, because the church does make an explicit stipulation for a case of life or death situations.
Well, and isn't that also sort of a unique situation where you're saying you're being possessed by a witch?
Yeah, Ghost possession's a whole other weird kettle of fish.
Right.
Whole nother show.
And probably a whole nother shows, especially since
Yeah,
we're kind of already over time here.
yeah, we're coming to the
Oh,
end.
okay.
We need to.
Rich, I
wrap
want to
up.
thank you for joining us. You've been an absolute pleasure to chat with.
Yeah, no, very interesting.
I do have your email. I do
Yeah,
think
thanks for having me.
we're going to have you on again sometime. I think after we head out to Gettysburg, we'll have you on. We'll talk about what happened out there.
Yeah, well, and
For
maybe
sure, Dan, and anytime you want, just give me a shot.
we'll be able to
Great.
read your book first.
One more thing, because I always want to do this with, especially with writer guests.
Yes.
Do you have any books out or about to come out that you want to plug before you go?
Well, 2 weeks ago, it just came out with The Ghost of the Civil War.
Mhm.
So it's available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that stuff. And you can find my authors page on Llewellyn Publishing's website that lists all the books. And if you want to see like some different cases and things I've done as far as EVPs and things like that, all Paranormal Incorporated, all spelled out.com.
Nice.
Okay. Rich, thank you so much. You've been a great guest. We'll be having you on again. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap us up for tonight. I do want to remind any of our fans who want to give us a hand, because we could use your support, www.patreon.com/demonology. If you go to the Patreon site, look up Paranormal Encyclopedia or Demonology, you can find us. We could definitely use the support. We're always looking for great advertisers for the show as well.
Yes.
But that wraps us up for tonight. This is Kevin,
Brian, my books are all available on Amazon.
except the ones on the floor.
Except the one
wait,
that-
wait.
Oh, the one on the floor is. Oh, there it goes. There we go.
There we go.
They're all bound in human flesh, inked in blood, and handcrafted by Norwegian circus elves.
And we're getting the demons to do it for the next printing.
Yeah, the next printing we get demons.
I got a guy who knows a demon.
Nice.
And honey?
And I'm Misha Campbell, psychic, and that's it.
And she dance.
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 Good night, everybody, and God bless.
Good shot.